So welcome everyone to compliance of mobile devices in the healthcare sector. Hopefully you are on channel 3, you can all hear me okay. Looking pretty good? All right. So by way of introduction, my name is James Plouffe. I'm the lead solutions architect in MobileIron's Service Connect ecosystem team. So you may have seen John Morgan talking about that a little bit in this morning's keynote. I work on the team that integrates the MobileIron core and cloud products with kind of the big infrastructure providers, the security folks. So that's my primary role. When you introduce yourself at MobileIron, you're supposed to share an interesting fact about yourself. So my other job when I'm not working at MobileIron is as a technical consultant for the television show Mr. Robot. I'm not sure if any of you guys have watched that, but if you haven't, as IT people, I would encourage you to. It's pretty interesting. It's not just a shameless plug. And if you remember my name and you get to the season finale, you'll see a funny little Easter egg there. Without further ado, let's dig right in. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone sitting in the audience that mobile devices have kind of changed the threat landscape, and that a lot of the security techniques that we've applied previously kind of need to be reevaluated for the mobile context, in the mobile context. So when we look at things like electronic patient healthcare information or ePHI, we're seeing interesting new threats emerge by way of mobile devices. So in the good old days, all of your device security was kind of centered on the fact that IT had locked down everything and had complete control of the device. The way things work with mobile these days is that you may or may not have control of those things. And I think one of the other things that is probably the biggest change in terms of risk to ePHI is the fact that these devices are so highly portable and so well connected. So if you think about the days of yore when folks were maybe carrying a laptop, it may have been with them, but probably the biggest risk to the laptop was not data being intercepted so much as the risk was a car window getting broken out and someone's laptop bag being stolen out of the car of their vehicle, right? So there is a little bit of good news in the mobile world. I think this has been talked about probably quite a bit over the last few days, but it's the evolution of the mobile operating system architecture. So when you kind of look at legacy operating systems, I'm going to pick on Windows 32 derivatives here because they're the easiest target, unfortunately. You sort of had this mashup where there wasn't really a clearly defined boundary between user mode and kernel mode. And so you could have applications that could run in user space or sometimes kernel space. You had device drivers that could run in kernel space. You had device drivers and applications that could replace system files. So if any of you have been in IT as long as I have, you probably have had some moments where you were banging your head against an NT351 or 4.0 workstation with a bad graphics driver that simply would not behave anymore. So just show of hands, anybody who's been there? I just want to know that I'm not alone. That's the main thing. But mobile is actually quite a bit different. So, I mean, that starts with there being a very clear delineation between user mode and kernel mode. That's very important. We also start to see things like application sandboxing emerge. Applications are always confined to user space. The mobile operating systems provide their own device drivers and a hardware abstraction layer, so you don't have to worry about that graphics card blowing up. Not that there are graphics cards per se in mobile devices, but graphics drivers or printer drivers blowing up your installation. So we see the move from the open file system to the application sandboxing mechanism that I mentioned. This is really important because applications now sit in their own sandbox. They usually run as their own user IDs. They have very limited channels that they can interact with both other applications and the underlying operating system, and they don't have the ability to update or manipulate the underlying operating system. And as part of that same model, you go from the unprotected kernel to a protected kernel. Basically, the OS itself is monolithic. You get your application, or you get your OS updates usually directly from your device manufacturer, and that comes as a holistic software package. You don't have to patch it, right? And then finally, you go from untrusted to trusted security primitives. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the coming slides, but instead of sort of the management and security capabilities being an afterthought, they're now kind of baked into the core OS. So that's another advantage to the way that the architecture has evolved. And here's a great example of that, again, kind of picking on the Windows 32 world. You used to have an agent for every single thing that you needed to do, whether that was configuration management, file system encryption, remote access, whatever it was. Most of those things are now natively part of the mobile device operating systems. You have built-in VPN clients or very carefully constructed VPN plugin frameworks. Device encryption is a core part of that. You've also got passcode controls and other interesting capabilities, and of course, all the management APIs that we can leverage to take care of things. So this makes a lot of these awful things go away. The DLL Hell, as it's been called. It helps resolve some of the poor user experience with getting weird conflicts and confusing error messages. It also helps reduce the high total cost of ownership. Running all these things takes staff and time, and there is a cost associated with that. And it turns out that perhaps it doesn't give you the clearest picture of whether or not you're complying with the regulations after all. So, as I mentioned, in the EMM world, we actually eschew the notion of having to have all of these agents, and the device itself establishes an exclusive one-to-one relationship with the EMM provider, and that gives the EMM tools the capability to do all of those things, to provision, configure, tunnel, monitor, and enforce all of the things on the device. So basically you have one console that you can use to turn most of the knobs that you care about. And in that way, EMM can then become the gatekeeper and help either facilitate or, if necessary, restrict access to those enterprise back-end resources. So this slide, I think, is interesting. The tagline, of course, that it has is EMM starts where the perimeter stops. I would argue, actually, that it's not so much where the perimeter stops, but redefining the size and scale of the perimeter. And so the term that I actually prefer to use is we're kind of establishing little micro perimeters. And so you're applying protection to the places that you need it most, and not necessarily trying to paint with a broad brush. You protect the data you need in the places you need to protect it, but you're not trying to fix everything. So healthit.gov lists some of the risks for ePHI on mobile devices. Interestingly, I don't think these are unique to the healthcare field, but they list lost or stolen mobile devices as a risk. I think that is still an issue, but as protective as we are of our devices, I think it might be less of a risk than they imagine. Downloaded virus or malware. This is an interesting one to me insofar as there definitely is mobile malware out there, there's no question about it, but it has to appear in very specific ways, and part of the benefits of application sandboxing is that it's easier to control what malware can do. Not to say that you're invulnerable, but I would argue that the risks are actually quite a bit lower. They list actually shared mobile devices as a risk as well, and I thought this one was interesting because I think, is anyone in the audience today using mobile devices in a clinical setting? Folks, a little bit? So what struck me about this particular point is the fact that most healthcare facilities operate 24/7. They have shift work. It would be impractical to give every single employee a dedicated device, especially when each of those devices would sit idle for 2/3 of the day. The cost implications of that, I think, are unreasonable. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, unsecured Wi-Fi networks. They're a challenge everywhere. They're surprisingly pervasive. We'll talk a little bit about how mobile is particularly affected by that as we move through this. So conveniently, to address these risks, healthit.gov also provides a series of helpful pointers on what you can do to help remediate some of those risks. So they suggest setting a strong password, encrypting storage, requiring automatic log off, and requiring a unique user ID. Here again, I don't think unique user IDs are something that are unique to mobile. I think we all understand the implications of overloading user accounts and what the risks are associated with that, or at least I hope we do. Remote wipe, the capability to lock the device, recommending keeping the device with you. Number 8 is an interesting one. I have a privacy shield for my laptop, but I do not have a privacy screen for my mobile device. Does anyone have a mobile privacy shield on their device? They do in fact make them, but... Oh, okay. They do provide a... Okay, interesting. Refrain from sharing a mobile device. I think, not to belabor the point, but I think that guidance is impractical for a lot of cost reasons. As a consumer of healthcare, I don't want my cost of healthcare to be rising because more people need iPads. Just me personally. Call it selfish. Number 10, register the mobile device, I thought was interesting because I feel like there's a clause in that sentence that is missing. Register it to whom or with what, I'm not sure. It's unclear here. I have some suggestions, but I don't know if that recommendation goes quite far enough. Installing a firewall. So interesting scenario there. That certainly applies probably at the laptop level. You want to install a desktop firewall. That's a reasonable thing. I think this is interesting for mobile devices because most mobile devices don't implement any kind of service that runs as a listener that could be protected by a firewall. But to take it one step further, you can't get access to the network driver stack to insert the firewall driver where it would need to live even if you could install it. So we'll talk about maybe a different approach to providing, I think, the kind of segmentation that they were maybe going for when they recommended that. Secure Wi-Fi connection, very important. Hopefully most folks are using one of the modern Wi-Fi authentication and encryption mechanisms. Finally, research mobile applications. I also am a little curious what they meant by that. Again, I have my own ideas, but it seems a little bit vague. So all of these are safeguards that they recommend, obviously, with the classical sort of information security CIA triad. You want to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of PHI. And that's not so different from what everybody does with info security all the time. Just a different class of data, right? So we see changes in the mobile threat landscape. If you've seen any of my other presentations so far this week, I apologize. This is probably the 9th time you've seen this slide, but I'll go through it one more time just in case. One of the interesting things we see, a lot of these are old problems that have a slightly new twist on them. So if you look at the device and OS vulnerabilities, patches not being up to date, those are things that have existed for as long as we've had operating systems, right? But we start to look at more sinister things like jailbreaking and rooting of devices, which creates a lot of risk for the devices because we talked about all of that inherent security that's baked into the operating system, and the minute you jailbreak or root that device, all of that security just goes away. There's also interesting things like people deploying, and these are primarily specific to Android devices, installing custom ROMs, turning on things like Android Debug Bridge, which gives you a way to sideload software, and USB debugging that lets you do other interesting and potentially nefarious stuff. I think the other thing that's interesting about mobile is that going back to kind of our analogy of the laptop world, people usually had one. These days, the average user is carrying 3.3 devices based on the last batch of statistics that I saw. So anyone in the audience carrying 2 or more devices right now? All right, so that's pretty good. Anybody carrying 3 or more? How many do you have? 4. All right, so yesterday the winner had 7 devices. So he had his work issued devices of every flavor, and then he had his personal variations of all that, plus an Apple Watch. So you're up there, but you didn't take the cake, sorry. So then we start taking a look at applications, so applications are interesting because there are so many of them. So I think at last count there were somewhere north of 3 million applications available in the commercial app stores. That's great for helping you find new tools to help you get your work done. The bad news, I think, there is that the bar for software quality has probably never been lower. Oops, clicker's going bananas, apologize for that. So one of the things that we start to see is that there are apps out there that are overtly malicious, and there are some that are just badly coded. And whether it's malice or sloppiness, you still run into scenarios where you might have things like data exfiltration or stolen application credentials that can then be used to mount other attacks. Also, with data moving to all of these mobile devices, we start to see interesting things emerge with user data leakage. When you control the laptop and had everything buttoned down, you could sort of restrict the flow of things. In scenarios with, for example, BYOD, where I might have my personal mail account and a work mail account, there are extra steps that you need to take to make sure that I'm not hairpinning things through my various email accounts. Usually there's no malice here, but we all do stupid human tricks to try and get our work done, and so that is an increasing risk, which actually dovetails into the next section, personal cloud storage, sync and share. So as a user, maybe I need to collaborate with a colleague, maybe I drop something on my personal Dropbox account, not really thinking much about the implications of doing that, but now it's out in the wide world, which is a place you'd probably prefer not to have it, especially if it's sensitive patient information. And then finally, unprotected networks, looking at things like rogue APs, open Wi-Fi, and man-in-the-middle attacks. When you're on your campus network, you can probably be reasonably assured that the security measures you've taken for that network are pretty appropriate. But if I'm a traveling care provider and I have to go to different places, I may stop off in a coffee shop or somewhere else and take advantage of a public hotspot where maybe the security controls aren't as good, and maybe folks are just up to some hijinks. So a couple of gotchas, and we touched on these a little bit when we were going through the countermeasures. Installing a firewall. Again, a scenario where a firewall is not a thing that you realistically can effectively enable in most mobile devices because you don't have access to the network stack. Requiring a unique user ID, I would hope that every user who is in your organization does have their very own beautiful snowflake of a user ID that they can use, and that is not something unique to mobile. Setting strong passcodes. The key thing here is really a question of enforcement. So ensuring that your mobile device security passcode policy is in line with your desktop logon policy. Refraining from sharing a device. I know I've said it at least 3 times already, but perhaps not practical in some deployment scenarios. And then using automatic log off, something that has radically different implications for a device that rarely gets turned off. So it's actually, this is the good news slide, I suppose, if we were to call it that, looking at some of these requirements. Installing a firewall, we've talked about why that doesn't work, but a different approach that you can take is to approach it as less of a network firewall and more of a logical firewall around the data that you want to protect. And so this is a scenario where you can leverage tools like containerization, whether that's implemented through native OS frameworks like Apple iOS managed apps or Android for work profiles or Samsung Knox workspace, things like that. Or even MobileIron App Connect. This lets you establish a perimeter around the apps and the data that you're using, and so you can worry a little less about having to have that firewall at the network level. Requiring a unique user ID. So one of the things we can do to help address this so that you can establish the identity of the user of the device is MobileIron integrates with both third-party PKI infrastructure, as well as providing an onboard certificate authority if you want to do that. And so the practical upshot here is that you can use those certificates to both identify the device with some unique identifier and identify the user. And so there are some implications for that, for being able to successfully identify a person or entity and authenticate them. Setting strong passwords, this is kind of a table stakes knob for MDM, the ability to be able to toggle on and require passcodes for the device, as well as if you're using things like App Connect, setting a separate container password for different data. So we have scenarios where, especially in BYOD, where folks may not want to set a device level passcode. I'm not sure what their personal rationale for that is, but I've heard that feedback. And so this allows you to just passcode protect a particular subset of apps and therefore protect the data inside them. Automatic log off. Here again is a scenario where App Connect can potentially be beneficial. You can terminate the App Connect sessions after a set period of time, and you also have the ability to basically time bomb the data in the App Connect container. There are other things you can do with MobileIron where you can exercise selective wipe if the device has been out of contact for some period of time, and you can also use the settings in MobileIron to create a screen timeout. So if you need to set that to 15 minutes per your security policy, you've got that ability to toggle on the automatic screen lock. And then lastly, refrain from sharing mobile devices. So we've already established how problematic that is. MobileIron actually offers a multi-user sign-in capability for iOS devices, where we push a web clip to the device that, as a shift worker, when I come into my shift, I can open up the web clip, log in with my user credentials, and all of my settings get deployed down to my device. At the end of my shift, I tap the web clip again, hit log off, hand the device off to whoever's coming in behind me. They repeat the process, and they get all the things that are relevant for them. Handy for cart scenarios, and I do want to footnote that with it is an iOS-only capability today, but if it's something where you need to provide multi-user capability on an iOS device, that does exist. So here again, another kind of feel-good chart. When we're looking at access control, again, we kind of hit on some of these in the previous slide. Unique user identification, automatic log off, all covered. Encryption and decryption, so that can be enforced both at the device level within MobileIron and using tools like our Sentry Gateway, so you can actually encrypt data in transit as it moves from the mobile device to the enterprise backend, however you approach that. Audit controls. All the security capabilities in the world are great, but if you can't prove them to regulators or auditors, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good, it turns out. And so we provide auditability of admin actions and different states of the device through facilities like syslog, and we have all of that information available in the admin console as well, so however you choose to consume that for your reporting purposes should be available to you. Integrity, this goes back to our discussion about checking out, really in my view, the integrity of the device or the OS and making sure that the device has not been jailbroken or rooted, because once again, once that process has taken place, all of the underlying security capabilities of the OS are null and void, and at that point it's very difficult to rely on anything the device tells you. Transmission security, again, this is more of a capability that exists in our Sentry Gateway product, so we provide a couple of different tools. We have app tunneling as part of our App Connect suite, which is almost like an HTTP reverse proxy capability for mobile applications. We have MobileIron Tunnel, which is a per-app VPN tunnel capability that will terminate on Sentry. And we also support per-app VPN with a number of the leading VPN providers. So if you're using someone else's VPN technology, you've still got the ability to take advantage of per-app VPN. Is everyone familiar with per-app VPN and how that works? It's actually one of my favorite things. As a recovering network guy, the notion of split tunneling used to drive me bananas, but then if you had users sort of hopping on the VPN tunnel with whatever they were using at home, I never liked that either because I wanted to conserve my precious network bandwidth. And so with the advent of per-app VPN, you can create a very, very narrow perimeter about what you want to tunnel back to the enterprise and protect that while it's in flight. So I think it's great. So again, all of these capabilities are implemented through EMM. So these are all knobs that you can turn through the MobileIron console. The policies exist there, and then you can use EMM to broker and enforce access control as you're letting these mobile devices access enterprise backend resources. One of the other things that we confront, and this is less a specific HIPAA or healthcare issue, but something that we see, especially again in BYOD scenarios, is users worrying about exactly what level of visibility their employers have into their personal devices. And so it's just something to be mindful of as you're approaching any mobility initiative, that if you're dealing with scenarios where you don't own the device, it's very important to communicate what you can and cannot see, and what you can and cannot do on the device, and I think most importantly, under what conditions you will do things. So I think everyone knows that one of the capabilities MDM provides is the ability to do a full wipe on the device, which is really the nuclear option. And I think this is probably the number one thing that concerns people, that something bad could happen and all of a sudden the pictures from my children's piano recital have just gone away. So one of the most important things that you can do to help make mobility programs successful is communicate exactly what you're doing and under what conditions you will do it. And that helps ease some users' minds. There's a few of us that are kind of in the tinfoil hat brigade. I might be one of those guys. But for most folks, just understanding what can happen and simple graphics like this help allay a lot of those concerns. So I wanted to bring up the MobileIron Security Labs. I don't know how many of you were in this morning session, the Customer Security Forum Live. Were any of you over here, I think, this morning? So we have a team of guys from across the company, actually, that work on doing kind of security research, sort of looking at other people's security research and trying to synthesize that and figure out what that means for us and for you. So it's folks from our engineering teams, it's folks from professional services. I'm a member of that team. Some of our field SEs are participants as well. We host what is likely going to be quarterly conference calls going forward, just sort of talking about the threat landscape and providing some information about that, as well as doing some publications and popping up at some of those fun industry events. So keep an eye on your inbox for those, looking for invites. As MobileIron customers, you should be getting them. Some of that will be relevant to you. Hopefully we'll be able to share some good information. The other thing that we hope to be able to accomplish with that forum is to get feedback from you guys. So what are your security concerns? What are the challenges you're running into? This sort of thing, so that we can help shape things like product direction, or maybe propose technical countermeasures or compensating controls to help you in your day-to-day. So coming back to our pyramid of the mobile threat vector landscape, you can see that MobileIron helps address virtually all of these challenges in some form or fashion. There was one I would point out in particular, looking at access to cloud apps. Have any of you been to the MobileIron Access sessions today? I don't know if there was one today. There might have been one yesterday. So if you haven't seen MobileIron Access, it's a method of protecting access to authorized cloud repositories. So I think there's a session going on tomorrow, hosted by Vijay Pawar from our product team. Really cool stuff, worth checking out. So definitely stop by and see that. And just as a reminder, we can make all of the hurt with the agents go away. And then looking at the risk landscape, one of the things we didn't touch on a ton in the application sphere is app reputation or malware. And so we talked about that a little bit. As MobileIron, we have a great view into the application inventory on devices, but that's really limited to kind of the package ID and the version number, and that doesn't give us the deep insight into how those applications may be behaving and what sort of vulnerabilities they may exhibit. And so while we can do things to help secure corporate applications and get them deployed, if there are applications out there that are overtly malicious, we don't necessarily have a good view into that. And so that's a scenario where some of the ecosystem partners that are lined up along the back here and along that wall can help provide that additional insight. So what they do effectively is take a look at the applications, start by looking at who the application provider is. Is this someone who has built something bad before? If they built something bad before, the likelihood is high that they might build something bad again. And then they start to examine things like, what sort of permissions is this application requesting? So the funny example that we usually give in that scenario is a flashlight application that has the ability to send and receive SMS as well as read your contacts. Why on earth would a flashlight need to do those things? So that probably belies some more troublesome behavior underneath. And then they can use techniques like static analysis to go through the source code to figure out, is there anything hard-coded into the app that's a bad idea? Clear text passwords, HTTP endpoints that aren't encrypted, these sorts of things that may provide data leakage vectors or other risks. And then a lot of them also do things like dynamic analysis, so they actually execute the app to see what it does. So while this app is running, where does it send data to? Who does it talk to? What kind of calls to the underlying OS does it make? And so this is a scenario where adding this can help you get a little bit better risk profile in terms of what's deployed in your mobile fleet. So looking at some of the consolidated health informatics practical challenges, securing mobile data and access. So there's really kind of two sides to that coin, right? Protecting the mobile device and protecting the data on the device. So we obviously provide the capabilities for adding configurations to the device to help secure those, but also providing tools like App Connect and Sentry to protect data as it lives on the device and as it moves back and forth between. BYOD initiatives, I touched on this very briefly earlier, talking about the capability to restrict the flow of mail between personal and business accounts, very important. Secure mobile access, so providing some capability for caregivers on the go to get access to enterprise backend resources that you don't want to expose directly to the internet. Password management can be a pain. This is an area where certificates can help you ease that. So by deploying certificates, users don't necessarily have to deal with password lifecycle management issues. Photographs, so providing mechanisms for caregivers to get photographs of different things that they might need for diagnostic purposes, but providing a containerized way so that that information doesn't leak out. Like, it's not sitting in a caregiver's personal photo library on their device. And finally, secure email. This kind of goes back to the secure mobile data access and things you would do with BYOD initiatives, but making sure that everything is going through the appropriate DLP filters. And this is just a quick, fun graphic of all of those things playing out sort of in the MobileIron ecosystem. Again, we provide containers to help protect data while it's sitting on the device. We have DLP controls for those containers. You can leverage our ecosystem for things like anti-malware using app reputation and MTP, and I would encourage you to check out those folks along the back. We do have a number of integrations, including FireEye, Splunk, and Cisco, so if you guys are using any of those for your threat management, you can do that as well. And then we also provide for our own proprietary solution. We do have something called Docs at Work that lets you access enterprise backend CIFS repositories, WebDAV repositories. Gives you sort of a nice, neat little front end to your different file shares that you can use so folks can go through, get access to data, but it stays in a nice, tight sandbox. Also, the crypto that we use is FIPS 140-2, so hopefully if it's good enough for the DoD, it's good enough for you. And that is it. So questions if you have them. Otherwise, thank you for attending. I'll actually be on this stage in another 15 minutes, so stick around if you want.